2A. Welcome to this paper session 2A, where we're looking at what connections matter in quantitative ethnography. My name is Mike Phillips, and I'm really happy to be moderating this session where we've got 4 fantastic papers from 4 really exciting authors and groups of authors to share with you. The idea of these sessions is that hopefully you'll start to see some connections between the different ideas that are being presented. And so what we're going to do is give people an opportunity when they're presenting their papers for about 10 minutes or so to give you an idea of the work that they've been doing. If you've got specific questions that you'd like to ask those presenters that come to you while they're presenting, then please feel free to pop those into the chat and we can engage in a chat conversation as each paper is being presented. But there may be ideas that you might want to save towards the end where you might be seeing some connections or things that you want to interrogate that cross over between papers. And so the last 15 minutes or maybe a bit longer, if we want the conversation to continue longer, we can then open up the floor and people can be asking questions and engaging in conversations that might actually cross over those different papers. So without too much further ado, I'm going to hand over to our first presenter, Nagar Mohammedasan from the University of Canterbury in Christchurch in New Zealand, so just across the ditch from me here in Australia. And Nagar's paper is Discovering Differences in Learning Behaviours During Active Video Watching Using ENA. So without further ado, I'll hand over to Nagar.
Thank you. Just share my screen. Can you all see my screen? Great. Hi, I'm Nagar. I'm a PhD student at the University of Canterbury, and today I'm going to talk about discovering differences in learning behaviors during active video watching using epistemic network analysis. So video-based learning is a type of learning that has become very popular, especially when the schools went online due to the COVID-19 lockdowns. But the main challenge in video-based learning is how to keep students engaged, because there is the lack of direct interaction between students and teachers in video-based learning. Active Video Watching, or AVW-based, is an online video-based learning platform that supports engagement in video-based learning by allowing students to watch the videos, the educational videos, and comment on them. This is a screenshot of AVW space. You can see here students can watch the videos and write comments and then tag their comments by aspects. Aspects are for directing the attention of the students to self-reflection or the key points of the video. We also have some interactive visualizations to allow the students to identify the important parts of the video that they received more number of comments from previous students. We also have the nudges, which are basically intelligent, personalized interventions that encourage students to foster good commenting behavior. And that is because in our earliest studies, we found that commenting is a very important activity that helps students to learn better in video-based learning. We have two groups of nudges, reminder nudges and quality nudges. Reminder nudges encourage students to write comments and use various aspects. And when a student writes a lot of comments using different aspects, they receive a positive feedback in the form of reminder nudges. And we also have the quality nudges, which focus on the quality and the content of the comments. So for example, if a student is writing comments that is very short or off topic, there will be a nudge for that student that asks the students to be ask the student to think more about the video and elaborate on the video. If a student is writing comments that are just repeating the content of the video, we ask the student to think more critically. And we also encourage the students to write self-reflections. For example, if a student reaches to the end of the video and hasn't made any self-reflective comment yet, we ask the student to, in the form of a nudge, we ask the student to reflect on their previous experience and use the tips they learned from the videos to plan for the future improvement. There are some positive feedbacks. For example, when a student writes her first self-reflective comment, or when the student writes a lot of self-reflective comments, they receive a positive feedback again. Our studies are based on ICAP framework, and we group students based on their engagement into different levels. So passive students are students who only watch the videos and they are just passive receivers of information and they don't make any comments. Active students are students who watch the videos and make comments, but their comments are mostly repeating the content of the video. However, constructive students are the students who watch the videos and make comments, and their comments show critical thinking and self-reflection and self-regulation. In our previous studies, we found that the nudges help students to be more engaged, so it become more active and constructive. However, we didn't know how they actually interact with the nudges or the other options in the system. So we wanted to know how different categories of students interacted with a VW space. To answer that, we developed this code scheme to code our logs of interactions from the website. So we have 3 codes for videos, different video status. So video play, video pause, and video end when the student reaches to the end of the video. And 3 codes for nudges, reminder nudges, quality nudges, and nudges that are in the form of positive feedback. And we have 3 codes for comments based on the predicted quality of the comment that the student has submitted. Comment Q1 refers to when a student make a comment that is predicted to be a short or off-topic comment. And comment Q2 refers to comments that are just elaborating or criticizing the video. And comment Q3 refers to comments that are show some self-reflective and self-regulative thoughts. So for example, this student has commented, "I try to leave a slide for each key idea." And then we looked at the frequency of these codes for different groups of students in their logs of interactions. We can see here, passive students had high frequency of video play, but they had lots of zeros for other codes, and it's because they didn't make any comment, and that's why they didn't get any positive feedback on their comments. Also, for constructive students, we can see that they had higher frequency of comments and high quality compared to active students. Then we applied Epistemic Network Analysis, or ENA, for the units of our analysis. We define them as the category of students, so constructive, active, and passive, subsetted by the student IDs. And for the conversation of the analysis, we defined it as the student ID, the video they are watching, and the session of interaction they are in. And we use the codes that I just described. And we generated these 3 networks for each of the categories of students. We can see here for passive students and the blue network, there's no connection with comment codes or comment nodes, and that's because they didn't make any comments. Also, if we look at passive and active students, and this connection between video play and receiving a reminder nudge, we can see that this connection is stronger for passive and active students. It's more stronger than this connection for constructive students. And that could indicate that passive and active students were more likely to miss or skip or ignore the nudges and continue watching the video. We also generated the comparison networks and we looked at them. So for example, for the comparison network for active versus constructive students, we can see again this connection was significantly stronger than for active students than constructive students. And it again shows that they were just passing or skipping the nudges. And also we can see there's a strong connection between video pause and commenting in high quality compared to the connections with comments in higher quality with the nudges. And that could mean that constructive students were more likely to be initiative and make high quality comments without necessarily getting a nudge. If we look at the comparison network for passive and active students, again, we see this connection is stronger for passive students, meaning that they were just skipping the nudges. Also, this connection between video pause and video play was stronger for passive students. And that could again show that they were just watching the video and they weren't doing any other interaction. Also, if we look at the video end node, there's no blue connection to any of the other codes for passive students, and that could indicate that passive students didn't watch the video to the end of it. So in conclusion, passive students and active students tend to ignore or miss the nudges. Also, passive students are likely to not fully watch the videos. These insights can help us to improve our system. And we thought about having a visualization of their progress to remind them to make comments and watch the videos fully. Also, we could provide a visualization of the history of the nudges that they received, so they can always go back to it and review it. The limitation of our work is that we didn't have some logs in the system for interaction with the visualization or the nudges and like hovering over them. And also we didn't have any log for skipping the video or moving forwards or backwards. The other limitation of our work was that the networks that we generated didn't have any direction. So we don't know which event actually happened first. We just saw the regular interactions that could happen. We have some more analysis on comparing students who started early versus late in the paper, but because our time is short, I would like to invite you to read the paper if you're interested. Thanks for listening. I'm looking forward to hearing your comments and your questions.
Join with me, please, in congratulating Nagar on a fantastic first ICQE presentation, a great study, and one that I would encourage you to have a look at the paper if you haven't had an opportunity to do so. A really great paper. We're going to move on to our second paper in this series of 4, but if you do have questions or comments that you'd like to be asking each author before we get to a general discussion at the end, please feel free to pop those into the chat. But our second paper is from Asma Al-Zarani, who is from Monash University, and she's got a team which is truly international in nature in terms of the authorship on this paper. So other colleagues from Australia, like Ishan, who's in the audience here today, but also others from Spain, the Netherlands, and Saudi Arabia. And their paper is looking at success enablers of learning analytics adoption in higher education. So Asma, without further ado, over to you.
Thank you. Hello, everyone. This is Asma. I'm doing PhD at Monash University. Today, I'm gonna present a paper titled Success Enabler of Learning Analytics Adoption in Higher Education, a quantitative ethnographic study. This paper focuses in the success enabler from the perspective of CDM manager at European higher education institution. The finding of this paper help higher education institution create a strategy that support the successful adoption of learning analytics. Here's the outline for the paper. I will begin with the learning analytics field. It has been widely recognized as in the field of research and practice. It's provide our It provides opportunities or offer opportunities to enhance learning, teaching, and management, institutional management. There is many studies discuss the adoption of learning analytics. The majority of them discuss like the challenge, while there is less attention toward the success enabler of learning analytics. Because of that, this paper will fill this gap by answering the question, what factors are associated with the success enabler within different learning analytics adoption scopes. The adoption scopes can be non-appropriation, partial, and full. I will discuss later the definition of each one. Literature review. There is a few studies discuss the success factors, but we can conclude from the literature, the existing literature, that the success factors in learning analytics can be analytical culture, analytical capabilities, stakeholder involvement, strategy, and technology. The data collection, as you can see here, this research conducted a semi-structured interview with senior manager at European Higher Education Institution from 44 European higher education. The higher education are varied in terms of location, ranking top scoop, and so on. But we're going to focus on this paper in the scoop. As we can see, there is 4 types of scoop, which is none. There is no action taken in the preparation for learning activities. Appropriation, where the higher education took some appropriation steps, such as setting strategy. The partial, where the learning analytics was implemented in some parts of higher education, while the full is the implementation and strategy of learning analytics cover the whole higher education institution. The thematic analysis, the thematic analysis end up with 91 thematic group comprised of 21 thematic group comprised of 99 codes. We're going to focus only on 6 of the thematic group within the codes. We will only use the success enabler from the success to find the connection between, or if there is any strong connection between success enabler and the code of different success factors. The ENA, the unit of analysis in this paper, corresponded to the different interviewed higher education institution grouped by the scope of learning analytics adoption. The stanza corresponded to a conversation utterance during an interview, which is 2 consecutive conversation in our case. The following slide, I'm gonna show you the results by showing the connection between the success enablers and other success factors between the pre-partial and full. We exclude the non-adoption in this study because the ENA model of non-adoption higher education doesn't show any strong connection between success enabler and other success factors. The result, the first one is between success enabler and analytical culture. We mean here by analytical culture as the culture for learning analytics at the institution. So as you can see, the figure A, it's talk about show the ENA model of pre-partial higher education institution. There's a strong connection between success enabler and developing culture. This shows that the interest in applying learning analytics to enhance learning and teaching play an important role to success of learning analytics. While in figure B, there is a strong connection. It's for full adoption, fully adopted higher education institution. There is a strong connection between success enabler and strategic. This indicates that the level of success can be improved by address the culture consideration. Here it's between the success enabler and types of analytical capabilities. We mean here the analytical capability can be described as the institutional analytical capabilities of learning analytics and the action taken to improve them. In the pre-partial higher education institution, there is a strong connection between success enabler and expert. This indicates that the institution with a narrow scope of adoption rely on expert, while the figure B, it's for fully adopted scope adoption. There is a relationship between success enabler and gaps. This suggestion that full groups has involved more stakeholder that could see the need to address the gap in understanding of learning analytics. The third one is between success enablers and type of stakeholders involvement. Identify stakeholder involvement, identify the process by which higher education institution communicates and consulted different stakeholders in the planning or implementation of learning analytics. The figure A shows that there is no obvious connection between success enabler and other stakeholder involvement, while in figure B, there is a strong connection between success enabler and high level. This shows that institution with full adoption has a significant engagement with senior manager and potentially support from them. The fourth one is between success enabler and strategy. The strategy developed or implemented for learning analytics. The pre-partial higher education institution doesn't, the ENA doesn't show any strong connection between success enabler or with any types of strategy, while the fully adopted scope higher education institution show there is a connection between success enabler and embedded strategy. This shows that the existing strategy increased the priority of learning ethics and potentially being able to dedicate more resources for learning analytics. The last one, it is between success enabler and technology. This code identify action that higher education took to prepare themselves for the learning analytics technological infrastructure. Again, the pre-partial doesn't show any connection between success enabler and other types of technology, while the fully adopted higher education institution shows a connection between success enabler and external partnership. Such connection indicate that the external party may help scale up the learning analytics adoption. The conclusion, this research lays the foundation for higher education institutions who are thinking to launch learning analytics advice skills or higher education that have implemented learning analytics to consider these success enablers that could help them to adopt learning analytics successfully. There is some limitation in this paper. This paper is based on the European Higher Education Institution. So maybe there is a need for in the future research, there is a need to understand the success enabler in different regions. And also this study only focused on 5 success factors. Thank you so much.
Fantastic, Asma. Thank you so much. And I think the connection between learning analytics and the quantitative ethnography community is a really strong one, as indicated in Vita's opening keynote earlier today. But here's another example of that really strong connection. So thank you so much for sharing your work with us. And if people do have questions for Asma, as there was one for Nagar in the chat, then please feel free to pop that into the chat as well. So Asma, if you'd like to stop sharing your screen, then we can invite our next presenters, Hazel and Gold, to share their slides. This is a paper that I have a particular bias and interest towards. The notion of participatory quantitative ethnography is an idea that's really close to my heart. And every time I hear both Hazel and Gold present their ideas, I learn an awful lot. So like me, I hope you're looking forward to this presentation. And Hazel, over to you.
Thank you. Can you see my slides? Great. Okay, so I actually have my slides over here, so I might be like switching from here to here. So our paper is entitled Constructing Interpretations with Participants Through Epistemic Network Analysis Towards Participatory Approaches in Quantitative Ethnography. And yes, my co-author is my wonderful advisor, Dr. Ergens. And let me share with you what we have been doing, but we can share other things as well tomorrow in our symposium. So we start with very brief reference to participatory research. And so basically what is it, and the commonality among the different participatory research approaches is that participants and researchers co-construct knowledge in research in different stages. So also that participants' expertise, especially, is valued and recognized. So this means that participants are working side by side with researchers. And what this can do in quantitative ethnography and more broadly, is that this contribution, collaboration can contribute to addressing long-standing issues of incomplete or thin representation of participants and their understandings, closing the gap between theory and practice, and this is especially important in educational research, and generating solutions to problems that involve local culture points of view and making these solutions more sustainable. So in participatory research in QE, we already can argue that ethnography itself is already participatory because we are including thick descriptions that include the researchers and the participants' perspectives. What we argue in participatory QE is that this participatory focus needs to be more explicit, and we still need to develop our tools and our understandings to provide that participation for participants. But the good news is that we already have some tools, we already have a lot of rigor in place that can help us to give that steps, and we're already giving those steps, and so Mike is one of those. What we have in our favor is that interaction between computational methods and human interpretations that allows us researchers to confront those biases that we bring to interpret the meanings of our participants. But also we have the tools where we have this interaction of internal and external cognition. And if we use the outputs of those tools with shared focus and visual attention with participants, we can create this joint sense making. However, we still need to amplify the multiplicity of voices that are included in the research process. And in order to do this, we need to further the development of the tools that already exist and imagine tools that we need to start to construct. So the research question that I have for this study is, how can ENA be used by researchers and participants to co-construct data interpretations? And so this research is part of a broader research project that I have, which also gave emergence to my dissertation study right now. So what I do in this broadly in this research is to explore the identity development of English as a foreign language teachers in Costa Rica. I am working for this paper with 2 pre-service teachers, and drawing from interview data. I have 3 interviews, and I'm focusing on the 3rd one, where we reflect on what was said in the 1st and the 2nd interview, and I do thematic analysis. So what we did was to code the 1st and the 2nd interview. And with that analysis, we were able to produce this ENA networks. And these networks showed the connections across the codes of adoption, rejection, and tensions. So what we're able to see here is identity negotiations in the form of adoption or rejection of ideas or practices from the community of practice. And in this case, this community was the teacher education program. But also we started to observe some tensions. There was quite a bit of tensions, especially in idealized notions of the native speaker, because some of the pre-service teachers were using the native speaker as their standard, their benchmark. but also adoption, tension, and rejection happened around their own language practices. For example, the use of their first language, which was Spanish, and also the reflection on accents, what accents should play in the English classroom. So for this paper, the results showed that ENA discussions with participants provided the following: either modifying a code, reacting to a code, or adding connections to a network. And I'm gonna provide examples of each of them. So modifying a code, this participant was discussing the need for teachers to provide authentic opportunities for interaction. This is very important when we're trying to learn a new language. So she was referring to this interaction, to providing this interaction through a native speaker. So she mentioned a couple of times, or many times, the role of the native speaker to facilitate these interactions. However, when looking at the networks and reflecting on what she had said in the first two interviews, actually what she was after was a more knowledgeable other. This more knowledgeable other didn't have to be a native speaker. So she said, native speakers, what are they? Who are they? But what if we could get people like me with a C1, which is an advanced English level, who would agree to come? What if I can get someone here in Costa Rica to talk with my students in my classroom? So my adoption would be anyone who can have a great English level, not necessarily a native speaker. So it's demystifying the idea of a native speaker as that standards that we need to have in the classroom, especially in the English as a foreign language classroom. So she's moving beyond the privilege to the native speaker. Reacting to a code, and this was the other participant who also reacted to the native speaker as a standard, but her point of view was coming from a deficit perspective, because she was expressing her frustration for having a Spanish accent when speaking English. And this is somebody who wants to be an English teacher. So for her, it was very difficult to understand and see that she didn't sound very native-like as she would like to sound. And so this was the first time, when looking at the network, this was the first time that she was confronted with this strongly held belief that she had about her own identity as a non-native speaker of English. So what she did was to react and say, well, I'm not there yet. I'm not there yet to feel good about my accent, but I know by looking at this that it shouldn't be the case. It is completely unrealistic to think and to desire to want to have this native-like proficiency. So she said, I guess in the future, when I read your research, so my research, I'm going to say, maybe I was being too harsh on myself. I guess that's something that's going to change. Maybe I'm going to come to a closure of not being the best, not being native. So she was, this was her beginning to challenge that idealized notion that she had, that she needed to sound as a native speaker in order to validate her proficiency and her competence as an English educator. And the last one is adding a connection in a network where the participant didn't show that connection. And this was between rejecting a practice, and reflections on accents. So this participant was drawing from her own experience as having been born in Costa Rica and living there for 7 years, and then moving here to the United States to learn English as a second language. So she was an ESL learner here, and then she went back to Costa Rica like 10 years after that. She started to see her own network and realized that, in fact, she doesn't think much about accents. But drawing from her experience, she realized that she might start to pay more attention to that. So what she said was, I can see it in Spanish. When I arrived here in Costa Rica, I thought I spoke Spanish because in the US, I was a little bit self-conscious of my accent, my Spanish accent in English as a learner. But when I arrived here and I started to speak Spanish, my friends would say, "Oh, you speak funny." So I realized there's accents in every language and there's no right or wrong. So her feeling here was basically, I don't have any prejudice towards accents, but I know that out there, people perceive accents and my language learners will have to face those perceptions of other speakers. So this was her beginning to give priority to accents in her future teaching. Some conclusions about this study, even though we had a very small sample here, was that ENA discourse networks provided that space for researcher and participant collaboration. In previous cases, I did not have this opportunity for collaboration with my participants to co-construct these interpretations. And with this, what I was doing was including multiple perspectives. These networks were also a tangible representation of the teacher's identity used to elicit a cognitive response. So this reflection that probably would not have happened in the way that it happened and facilitate this joint cognition with me as the researcher. There are some implications that, again, we can discuss more thoroughly tomorrow for tool design for quantitative ethnography. So it's what I'm proposing here is to think about the affordances and the features of the tools. So thinking about the annotation, discussion, visualizations for the co-construction of knowledge, and thinking that these design choices for this future and existing tools will affect the roles, responsibilities, and power dynamics between researchers and participants, and especially the story and the stories that we want to tell with our research. Mm-hmm.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Hazel, once again for continuing to expand and extend the ways in which QE and ENA are being used. And I think that one of the things that's really cool about this session are the very different ways we're starting to see this approach being used, from smaller scale studies that are looking really deeply at individual teachers, through to Nagar and Asma's work, which is looking much more broadly, but still the power and the ability to make connections between really important ideas is one that underpins and is common across all three of these, which is why this session is all about what connections matter and about trying to understand different ways in which we can use QE. Our final presenter is somebody who has taught me an awful lot about a whole range of different aspects within QE, from her helping me better understand epistemic frame theory to really recently, like yesterday, giving me a boot back into encoder. Amanda Siebert-Evanston is somebody, if you haven't met her, I would really strongly encourage you to spend some time having a chat, because she is an absolute wealth of knowledge when it comes to QE and a whole range of different QE tools. And today she's going to be talking about connection making in the next generation science standards. So Amanda, over to you to finish off this session.
Oh my gosh, I'm so humbled, not only because I get to go after 3 amazing presentations where I have so many questions and ideas, but thank you for that introduction, Mike. All right. I'm showing slides still. Okay, so I'm Amanda Siebert-Evanston. I'm a creative producer and instructor in the Learning Analytics Master's program at UW. And today I want to talk to you about some of my work in minimizing your faces, about the next generation science standards. So recent standard-based reforms, such as the next generation science standards, have changed the landscape of education. It builds on research and connected learning, where it's a view of learning that's based on the idea that complex thinking in a domain involves learning these systematic relationships between core concepts. And one of the key features of the NGSS and its logo is this idea of 3-dimensional learning. So the disciplinary core ideas outline the content knowledge that students should learn and revisit across their K-12 education. The cross-cutting concepts describe these broad and overarching themes that span across all domains of science. And the science and engineering practices describe processes of inquiry and design, in addition to providing a lot of tools and frameworks to talk about how scientists and engineers engage in investigations and design processes. And so three-dimensional learning is meant to be this interconnected, progressive, sophisticated set of standards that is coherent across domains and grades. But in the process of creating this coherent, connected, progressive set of standards, the NGSS also became very complex and multi-layered document. And I'm going to quickly unpack the actual standards to help the future qualitative analysis. So NGSS was really trying to address this problem of a mile wide and an inch deep by essentially doing this sort of inch deep revisiting patterns over time. And so the standards are separated into 3 grade bands that differentiate the ages of students and the type of instruction based on their stage in school. And then the standards focus on 4 different disciplines that organize content areas in the standards, and they're addressed as disciplinary core ideas. Each of these ideas is fundamental content knowledge that are important to understand within that domain, and they're broken into separate sub-ideas and expectations for each piece. And so by revisiting these core ideas across the 3 grade bands, students are going to get this deep understanding of the core ideas of sciences. And so while the disciplines and grade bands provide this overarching organizational structure, the actual standards are depicted differently. And I talked about earlier today in the policy discussion about how documents like this really make it difficult to work with. So let me break it down a little bit more. Each page is separated into sections, and including the core idea for specific grade levels. The standards themselves are called performance expectations, and they describe what students should be doing in regards to the science and engineering practices, the core ideas, and the cross-cutting concepts. And so these outline the 208 standards across 59 pages, 3 grade bands, 4 disciplines, and 12 DCIs. And so I wanted to use this framework to check the consistency between standards and new programs that say that they're aligning with the standards. And one way to check this is to do an alignment study, which is checking the degree of agreement between the set of standards and materials or activities that are intended to address those standards. So typically, standards set some targets for what students should know and be able to do. A common comparison is to assessments, and this comparison consistency is called alignment. And so if 10% of the standards have natural selection, then 10% of your assessment should assess natural selection, or so it goes in these ideas. You might code multiple topics and check for things like cognitive demand, create alignment indices, or heat maps to compare. But I think the really cool thing is that you can start with these standards and start making alignment comparisons with other materials such as textbooks, student notebooks, online tools, classroom discussions, and see how they compare against the standards themselves, or compare everything. And so in my study, I actually focus on mostly just the standards, student notebooks, and classroom studies, but today I'm going to talk about the standards themselves. And particularly because we need to update our methodologies so that we can actually capture this interconnected nature of 3-dimensionality. And so I propose using a quantitative ethnographic approach where we identify qualitative stories and then provide statistical warrants that these stories generalize within the data set. Today, I'm going to focus mostly on the first part of the process, which was the grounded analysis of connections in 3-dimensional learning. But based on this, I coded the data to identify patterns across the data set. I used Epistemic Network Analysis, which measures and visualizes connections and affords testing differences between groups. And then I closed the interpretive loop to make sure I've grounded my understanding of the data. If it all works, then I can claim that I've measured 3-dimensional learning. Now, one caveat is that the disciplinary core ideas are very different from the other 2. They're structural and they're part of the dimensions. They're used to create and separate units, but the practices and concepts don't do that. The DCIs exist in every grade band. Every page has a DCI or has a core idea, but not every page has a practice or concept. Core ideas are separated into sub-ideas, but there's no sub-practices or concepts. And so since I'm interested in finding structures of connections and the same ideas appear in exactly the same place, there's really no added information. And so I account for the core ideas by analyzing connections between practices and concepts for a given DCI, for a given core idea. So what does this look like? What am I interested in? what's the appropriate level to model the connections? And so I conducted a grounded analysis of the NGSS to identify the ways that practices and concepts were connected within the context of their core idea. And so I employed a snowball approach to analyze the data where a single performance expectation was the smallest atomic unit that could have a connection. So I started there. And then I looked for connections within and across the page until I reached saturation and no longer found any new ways of connection making. So here's one standard, analyze and interpret data to provide evidence for the effects of resource availability on organisms and populations of organisms in an ecosystem. A very packed statement. And to fully understand how you actually do this, we actually have to look at the sub pieces. So analyzing three-dimensional components reveals that data analysis is about cause and effect relationships that students need to do to interpret information and make predictions. And so therefore, I argue that the connections are semantic. That is, they're all part of a single idea. And so three-dimensional connections are embedded semantically. Information is also tagged on the page with performance expectation codes that make it easier to identify these relationships. And so the connections are also typographical and embedded typographically on the page. And then what I did is I looked at one performance expectation and then I went to the next one on that page. And from the codes, I found that this concept in practice was about constructing explanations and making patterns. And in order to really understand how patterns can be used to identify cause and effect relationships. But to find out how find cause and effect patterns, we'd actually have to look back to the first performance expectation to see about the data, how the cause and effect relationships were set up and how the data itself was analyzed and interpreted to meet that expectation. And so this shows the dependencies across the concepts and practices within a given page. And so therefore, I also argue that in order to understand one performance expectations, we actually need to understand the other ones on that page as well. And we can't understand a single component without understanding the whole page. So in other words, a page is conceptually related and three-dimensional connections are embedded conceptually. So I did the same sort of process for other performance expectations and searched for how connections were made on that page. And I found the same three themes of semantic, typographical, and conceptual connections across a single page. And importantly, I found no connections between pages. All connections that I needed to find to understand a performance expectation were within the page itself. I looked at a few more pages and stopped after reaching saturation about these three themes. And so connections and the features of three-dimensional learning manifest across a page. Next, I visualize the connections by identifying all of the practices and connections and then connecting them to one another so that I can represent all of the possible relationships and dependencies between the ideas on the page. Not everything on a page may be directly related, but as my analysis or my qualitative analysis found, they seem to be connected enough that we saw how they were building on each other. And so a network model can represent these relationships and dependencies. I represented a second page as well and counted them up. And in this case, counted the presence or absence of connections rather than counting repeated concepts or practices. And in this way, by just doing presence and absence, we see binary summation is sufficient. So of course, there are several limitations. One is that although I did review all pages, this presents information specifically about 2 of the pages. I also could have included a second rater in this analysis. But why did I do all this? Why am I presenting it this way? And the idea is that I use this qualitative grounding to set up my epistemic network analysis. So a network model can represent these relationships and dependencies. Connections are manifesting across a page. And therefore I can look at my codes, set up my conversations based on a page, set up binary summation as my method. And in the end, this is the qualitative justification for the ENA choices I make in my future studies. So thank you.
Thank you, Amanda. Wow, once again, just a really interesting way to be using ENA and QE techniques to explore, yet again, a different idea or series of ideas. And so in this session, what we grouped these papers together for was to start to say, well, what's common amongst all 4 of these papers are people exploring what connections matter. But these connections can look very different in terms of the data that people are interrogating, or the ways in which they're using these QE tools. So like me, you might have a range of different questions that you might want to ask generally, or to specific presenters. And while you're starting to think about that, Gol, you've asked a great question of Nagar. I don't think that one's been answered yet. So Gol, do you want to just ask your question, or do you want me to just read it out, or what's best?
Sure, I can ask it.
Go, yeah.
So to think back to the first presentation, Nagar's presentation, so I'm curious what kind of findings you would expect from your data if you ran a directed ENA analysis. And I'll just read this. Do you have any guesses about how the order of the actions matter for these students based on what you know? And then I don't know if you're aware, but there is a directed ENA now available if you wanted to continue that study.
Yeah, thank you. I was just reading your message. Yeah, so I've recently learned about the directed ENA. So back then I wasn't very familiar with that. But for what type of analysis or what type of results I would expect from a directed network, I think, for example, if we think of a connection between video end and video play, we don't know if that means that the student was watching the video and reached to the end, or the student reached to the end and rewatched the video. And this could be solved either by the directed ENA, or having more logs that can, or like better codes, combined codes of the combined interactions to identify those sort of things. And also if I look at the, if we think of the nudges, we would like to know when we have a connection like a mid-quality comment, the student made a mid-quality comment, and there's a connection with a quality nudge. We want to know if the student made the comment after getting a quality nudge, or before that they got a nudge on, like as a feedback on the comment. So I don't know if that makes sense.
Yeah. So I love that. Those are the kinds of things I was wondering. Like you were saying, do they, go to the end of the video and rewatch it, or is it the other way around? So your hack seems to be you put those two codes together and it becomes one node. So it's like one code would be, what did you say, nudge, and then whatever that other action was. Another code would be that
the
action
comments.
and then nudge. Yeah, comments and then nudge. And so you're actually coding for that process, and that becomes a node. Is that what you're suggesting?
Yeah, so I think one option could be like combining them differently, but then that would, I think we would end up with lots of codes.
Yeah,
which is not very interpretable.
Yeah, you would end up with twice as many. Okay, yeah, cool. Thanks.
And that's the challenge, is that we always want more, but then we end up, how do we interpret all those kind of things? And I'm guilty of that more than probably most. Jamie, you've raised your hand. You always ask great questions, so I'm looking forward to hearing what you've got to ask.
No pressure. So Hazel, your presentation really resonated with me, because my research is very grounded in participatory methods. And I'm curious, perhaps I missed it because I think I might have come in a little bit late, but did you involve your participants in the design of the methods, your objectives, your research question, and what it specifically you wanted to look at?
This was a qualitative study that was very much exploratory, and the design sort of emerged. And so no, I didn't include my participants in that shape, but I sort of followed them to wherever they took me. And what I am doing right now is involving them in sort of the creation or sharing of the network. So in a sense, one of my long-term, midterm objectives is to bring the insights of the participants to shape the tools that we're using in QE. Yeah.
Yeah, that's critical. It's really awesome that you're doing that. I'm excited to see how it develops further.
Yeah.
I'm going to lift Hazel up a little bit more, because Hazel, you are doing something really cool. I mean, she is actually, we were talking about, just to relate to your question, Jamie, about having the participants involved. Like, they're not creating the codes, like Hazel created those codes ahead of time. So one thing is, how do we involve them at that level too? So she's actually now interviewing her participants and having them create, they're co-constructing that network together, including the codes. So she's like having them drag and drop and create a network, and they're doing that together and interpreting it together.
Yeah, I was gonna leave that for tomorrow. it's a preview.
Yeah, I think
it's just so cool.
It's so cool, and I think it's often something that's overlooked. Like in Canada, we refer to it as patient-oriented research, at least in the healthcare space, anyways. And it's often something that's overlooked. We go out into the community, we collect data on people living with some certain condition, and then we go back to them and we say, is this right? Do we do this okay? What are your thoughts on this? And can you help us share that message with the rest of the community? And I see it a lot in diabetes, that oftentimes this does happen, but those individuals are not involved in how you arrived at those results. And so that gap is there. And we're only now just starting to realize that in order to understand the conditions that people are living with, we have to involve them in that research as researchers alongside us. So it's great. It's great work.
Yeah, I've been very lucky to have participants who are really involved in this. And since what I study is identity, they start to get interested because it's their own identity and they've never talked about this with anyone. So almost after every interview, they tell me, oh, I feel like I went to the like an academic psychologist. So I'm not surprised anymore when they tell me this. They go like, yeah, I know, it's okay. And so I'm doing more of a narrative inquiry right now. So again, it's very personal and it's their stories. It's their experience, right? It's not something abstract. It's very much what they're thinking, what they're believing, the decisions that they're making right now. I'm following them to the first year of teaching. This data is from other participants and they were pre-service teachers, but right now I'm following them to the identity development during the first year of or their novice stage, right?
Yeah, and I think there might be a silver lining to it too, like I feel like people who are involved in that process become empowered about participating in research. And then, they're more likely to participate in more research or, have friends or colleagues get involved as well. And it kind of puts science sort of in a better light, I think. So,
or perhaps I think one of the things that probably will happen, I don't know, I'm guessing with my participants is that they might involve in some form of action research, and or they're also looking for academic programs here in the US. So I don't know to what extent that is going to affect the way that they see their own research in the future.
Yeah, I mean, the idea that we're all kind of talking about, this idea of participants researching with us, not us researching on them, I think is a really powerful idea. And Jamie, your idea of, what would happen if we actually got them involved right at the start of a study, if they were involved in developing the research questions and things, takes this idea of participants and participatory QE to a whole new level. And so you didn't need to feel any pressure with that question. It was an awesome one, as always. I am conscious that there is a community chat that's going on and an Indigenous QE interest group that's part of that. So if you are interested in going to that, please feel free to. But we can continue this conversation for as long as people would like to. So if there are other questions that people would like to ask, please feel free, just turn on your mic and ask away. Are there any other questions? That wait time in Zoom kind of really gets you, doesn't it?
Well, no? Mike, I always have questions, so I'm waiting for anyone else, but
it's all yours.
Okay, Amanda. I'm curious, have you shown any of these networks or your analyses to the author? So speaking, kind of related to participatory QE, have you shown them to any of the NGSS developers? It's such a big movement and such a large community of scholars who developed those.
Okay, so we're getting real here, right? I think about that all the time. I'm terrified of it, and I've never done it. When I initially had started working on this project, I started working with Lima Berland, who worked under one of the authors, and then pregnancy and COVID. So I never really landed it. I had talked to Department of Public Instruction in Wisconsin, and they were very excited, but they were excited in a way I wasn't anticipating, which is that, oh my gosh, so I could assess how teachers are doing in classrooms. And I was like, no, that's not at all what I would have thought you wanted to do with some of the eventual work on this, which is ENA spaces that allow you to look at classroom discussions, textbooks, etc. So it's one of my next steps, but I haven't really figured out how to do that. Like, do I just send, here's a 200-page document where I analyze something you did. What do you think? I mean, I'm so curious how you would even approach those conversations, and I just hadn't had them yet.
Yeah, because your situation is different, where that document was public, and you went and analyzed the public document, but it obviously has authors and a community. So yeah, how do you get in touch with those people? Yeah,
and I've always wondered, some of the things that we had thought about were even just sticking with the standards themselves. Is this, model-based reasoning was very prominent in some of the physical science standards and some of the earth science. Is that a product of the field, or is that a product of the lead author? What do we learn from this? Is it something that we could learn about more of the discipline? We could learn about more how instruction should happen? Or is it, could I show them this and they go, oh yeah, I love models. Or, oh, I never would have thought that modeling was so central. And I always thought that would be such a cool thing, but I didn't know how to, since this was, hundreds of people worked years and years on this document, and I come out of nowhere and I've done this thing. Where do I fit? I don't know. I mean, I would be so curious to learn from where you all think it would be best brought, but.
Yeah, we struggle with the same issues of how to communicate. But my question is, what do you know if in any way modeling is part of the process, or what do you know about the process of the creation of those standards?
Well, so the standards they wrote a lot about it. So it was in the era where Common Core, people hated Common Core because they felt like it was very much this top down, I'm just giving you this thing that's now disrupting your teaching. And so the NGSS from its initiation really tried to be much more participatory. So they had teachers, researchers, curriculum developers, scientists, they really tried to bring together people, and they had lots of these iterative participatory sections making these pieces. And then someone had what I'm presuming is the awful job, since we replicated it, which was tagging and making and developing the actual documents. And then since then, every few months there's a new book or a new thing trying to help explain it to teachers or explain it to instructional designers, because it's so big and unwieldy that usually what happens is people do whatever they were going to do anyway. And then they go to the NGSS and go, check, 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 check. And then they put it on their website to say, we've done this. And so so the process was pretty open. They list who the lead people are, who the essentially the chair of each discipline was, who all the sub writers were, and all of the teachers. And so, I could contact them and go, hey, I did this thing. But I don't even know. I mean, would they even want to know? I don't know. Or am I just, is it imposter syndrome where I'm like, I've done this thing. Do they care?
Well, there's one way to find out whether they care or not, isn't there?
Yes, there is.
Otherwise it's always going to be a yes.
Yeah, I was thinking about it a lot lately as we were thinking about policy discussions this morning, which is the problem, I think, and I'm very curious to come to your session tomorrow on participatory QE, because, I'm stuck in this place where I did my own thing and I haven't talked to the people that it's about or for. And I think, and I've always known that was a limitation. I just hadn't addressed it yet.
But it's also difficult when you're not dealing with the individuals necessarily. You're dealing with the artifacts, not with the people, right? Like, so it's a different series of challenges that you have to work through. So it's again another dimension of PQE that's like nobody really has the answer yet.
Well, that was the cool thing I saw in Hazel, your presentation. Like, how cool is it? Like that, it's such that QE is so visual, right? That we can do all the fancy and then go here. Like, what do you think about this? And seeing how your participants wrote all over it, I was like, oh my God, that's so cool to see how it's not just made, it like lives on and then can be reiterated. I was very blown away by your presentation.
I do want to pitch in and say something here. My very, very selfish reason to be a part of the PQE symposium tomorrow is really to learn from Gul and Hazel and Mike and all the other wonderful people on our team, because I think Mike's work and then more sort of precisely Simon's keynote and Gul's keynote in the first conference really made me think a lot about these issues, but I think they sort of started solidifying once Amanda and Brendan and Holly and I started working together and really. So I think I'm probably, like all the people who will present tomorrow, I think Holly and I are probably in the most infantile stages. So I think our context is also unique in that how do we, sort of negotiate, or not negotiate, but like sort of equally position the business needs with the educators' needs who we serve, and at what point do we bring them in, and how is that even realistically possible given that the pace of industry is so different. So I'm definitely going to be there more in place of a learner and just sort of open myself up, like, hey, like, I'm starting from probably like, negative 10 steps here in my PQE journey, but really, really want to adopt more and more participatory approaches in the way research reports are written, in the way, the way we even choose our codes, and, why. And in the teams we sort of work together, and I think, and then slowly and gradually even get to the higher levels that Hazel and Gul you are pointing at as co-constructing codes and, sort of in real time getting the participants to create these meaningful connections. So.
Yeah, I think, Mamta, you might be being a little bit hard on yourself, but I think the thing is that what you're pointing out, and this is something that I was just thinking about, Amanda, when you were talking then and comparing that to the work that Hazel and Gul have been doing, for example, and that context means everything, right? Like, so you can have this idea of participatory quantitative ethnography, but it's going to look different depending on what it is what's the data that you're working with, who are the people that are involved in generating that data. It's by necessity, it's got to look different. So I think in the same way that people have taken QE and taken some of the tools and gone in different directions with them, and all of them are entirely appropriate, all very different, but entirely appropriate uses of them. I think the same thing's likely to happen with an idea like participatory quantitative ethnography. It's going to look different, but the principles that underpin it are probably going to be the same driving ones, no matter what you do.
It is going to look different in different contexts, but as I'm listening to Amanda and also Mamta, we have sort of like the same positionings, policymaker and the researcher, students and the researcher, teacher and the researcher, or business and the researchers, and they're really coming from opposite, or at least very diverse experiences, and also previous experiences of interacting with the researchers or interacting with policymakers. And the point in participatory approaches is, how do we find that common ground? What do we need in that common ground to really construct something that's useful for both, and that contributes, to the knowledge generation, but contributes to both positionings.
Yeah, like there's this perspective. So taking like Hazel's example of what she's doing, it's like it's this member checking or validity, in ethnography, or even an equity perspective of involving people in the research that Jamie was also getting at, but kind of aligned with what Mike was saying. So like Asma, Nigar, Hazel, and Amanda, when you're using your QE tools, you as a researcher are reflecting and generating that knowledge. But when you bring other people in who also have a relationship with that data, like they're the participants, they're the creators of that data, and you co-reflect together, right? That knowledge generation changes fundamentally. And so it's like about equity and involving people in research, but it's also about that knowledge generation. And in Hazel's case, what was cool about the participatory aspect is that that network became a tool for reflection on their identity, right? So it's like she invented almost this tool to use as an identity reflection instead of an interview, or instead of maybe other tools that exist, a graphic organizer, right? You can think of lots of ways that people reflect on things. So it was like a different, this tool that they could reflect on their own identity with, and it was a QE tool. So I kind of see these two things happening in terms of validity of the research and involving people in the research, but also generating this new knowledge.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So this has been a fantastic conversation, and I think it's one that's probably likely to continue tomorrow and over the next couple of months, hopefully years potentially. So thank you, everybody. I'm just aware that for a number of you, it's been a long day, and for some of us, we haven't quite hit midday yet. So we're in a good space to continue the conversation, but I'm just conscious that some people are going to be pretty tired. So we might call it a day there. And thank you all so much for this fantastic session to our four presenters. Absolutely great papers. Loved reading all of them, and really enjoyed the conversation. So I hope everybody enjoys the rest of their day, no matter what time you're at, and we'll look forward to seeing everybody again tomorrow.
Good day, everyone. Bye-bye.